adaah for ruining an engagement by revealing that I was greeted by him 10 years ago. Let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up, I, 27F, had a best friend named Angie, 27F, who wasn't just a friend, she was the sister my parents never gave me. Our bond was woven through countless sleepovers, shared family celebrations, and the kind of unspoken understanding that only true kindred spirits can share. From age 6 until 18, we were inseparable. I even lived at her place during 2nd grade while my parents' marriage crumbled into a bitter divorce. Over the years, I learned to speak her native Russian, while she picked up my family's Spanish, our own secret languages that made our connection even more special. Her family became my second home. Her older brother and little sister treated me like their own flesh and blood. During our teenage years, Angie had 2 close male friends in our circle. One eventually became her boyfriend, while the other, Nico, now 29M, also Russian, began dating me when I was 17. Those teenage years weren't easy for me. I battled a serious heart condition that required constant medication. By 16, my health had improved enough that I only needed medication during irregular heartbeat episodes, which would strike suddenly and painfully, causing my heart to seize and my breathing to become erratic. Everyone in our friend group, including Nico, knew about my condition and understood the grave danger of mixing my medication with alcohol. As a result, I rarely drank, and when I did, it was only in safe environments with trusted friends. In our country, where the legal drinking age is 16, I limited myself to occasional sips of wine or beer, always mindful of my health. My relationship with Nico blossomed in the spring of my 17th year. Our first intimate encounter was gentle and consensual, filled with the nervous excitement of young love. 2 weeks later, while my parents were away at a retreat, he came over for what was supposed to be a romantic evening. I remember sipping a single glass of wine, feeling warm and content in his presence. But then my heart began its familiar, frightening dance, the irregular rhythm that signaled trouble. I took my medication, knowing it would make me drowsy, trusting that I was safe with someone who claimed to love me. The next morning, I awoke with an unfamiliar soreness, but dismissed it as nothing serious. 2 weeks later, my world shattered when I realized my monthly cycle was late. When I told Nico, his reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of showing concern, he broke down and confessed something that would haunt me for years to come. He had taken advantage of me while I was unconscious. His justification was chilling in its casualness. We had been intimate before, I was on birth control, and he had been careful. The violation of trust left me feeling hollow, disgusted, and deeply ashamed. In my confusion and pain, I could only bring myself to tell Angie. Looking back, I was too young to fully comprehend the gravity of what had happened. Angie's response was frustratingly dismissive. She suggested I break up with him if I felt uncomfortable, but reminded me that we were in a relationship and had been intimate before. Her words, meant to comfort, only deepened my shame and isolation. The years that followed were a blur of avoidance and silent suffering. I ended things with Nico the next day, but the aftermath was far from over. He and Angie began dating months later, forcing me to see him whenever I visited her. When I expressed my discomfort, she couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. Our once unbreakable bond slowly unraveled, until we became nothing more than distant social media connections. A decade passed, and life moved forward, until Angie's brother's joyful announcement of his impending fatherhood brought the past crashing back. When he reached out, inviting me to the baby shower, memories I'd buried deep began to surface. He remembered me as his third little sister and couldn't understand my reluctance to attend. When I learned Nico would be there, still by Angie's side after 9 years, I declined as gracefully as I could. But her brother persisted, pressing for answers about the mysterious rift that had torn apart our once inseparable friendship. In a moment of raw honesty, I finally named what had happened that night for what it was: assault. The truth, held silent for so long, exploded like a bomb in their family. Nico had been planning to propose at the baby shower, but Angie's brother, now a father-to-be, couldn't bear the thought of welcoming an assaulter into his family, especially with a baby daughter on the way. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Angie chose to stand by Nico, leading her brother to declare he wanted nothing to do with either of them. He couldn't imagine having his precious baby girl share family gatherings with someone capable of such an act. The family that had once been my second home was now fractured beyond repair. But the ripples of truth spread far beyond their family circle. 2 months ago, my professional world began to crumble when my HR department received an alarming number of calls. Angie's mother and relatives had launched a vindictive campaign, labeling me as part of a #MeToo scandal and warning that I was a liability who ruined men's lives. The HR team, led by a compassionate director who had overseen my career development from the beginning, documented every call meticulously. They even reached out to local law enforcement when the calls became increasingly hostile and frequent. Though my global company stood firmly behind me, having invested years in my specialized training and development, the damage was done. Whispers and pitying glances followed me through the corridors, a constant reminder that my private nightmare had invaded my carefully built career. My team tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could feel the shift in energy whenever I entered a room. The water cooler conversations that would suddenly stop, the sympathetic smiles that felt more like grimaces, the awkward attempts at support that only highlighted my isolation. The stress and anxiety drove me to throw myself into my work with desperate intensity. I took on every project available, paranoid that one more phone call could derail the career I'd spent 6 years building. My specialized field, a niche area requiring 6 to 8 years of rigorous education, including a bachelor's degree, master's, and state bar certification, had always been my safe haven. Now it felt like another battlefield where I had to prove my worth. Eventually, I secured a management position at a rival company, complete with a significant salary increase and the promise of a fresh start. The new role would put me in charge of a team of 15 professionals, with the potential to shape policy and drive innovation in my field. But what should have been a triumph felt hollow, merely an escape from the sympathetic looks of colleagues who knew too much. I found myself obsessively checking my LinkedIn profile, terrified that Angie's mother's campaign would follow me to my new workplace. Then came the phone call that shattered what little peace I'd managed to find. Angie's mother, the woman who had once been like a second mother to me, called me in tears. I shouldn't have answered, but after a decade of friendship, how could I ignore the woman who had shared countless cups of tea with me, who had joked that I showed her more love and attention than her own children? Her words were like daggers wrapped in silk. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you as a child," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "but how could you ruin Angie's happiness over something like this?" She spoke of how my revelation had torn their family apart, with Sven refusing to accept Nico and Angie standing firm by his side. She painted Nico as a changed man, a considerate young soul who would make her daughter happy. Never once did she use the word assault. Each time I tried to name it, she would dissolve into fresh tears, as if the truth was too painful to acknowledge. The conversation with my own mother proved equally heartbreaking. When Angie's mother reached out to her, we had a long, painful discussion that revealed just how deep cultural shame can run. My mother's first concern wasn't for my well-being, but for how this scandal might affect my marriage prospects. "What if your partner finds out you were used like that?" she whispered, as if my value as a person had somehow diminished. When she begged me to keep it secret from our relatives abroad, I felt the familiar shame rising again, the very shame I'd spent years in therapy trying to overcome. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with anger and grief. The therapy I'd started at age 21 had helped me process much of the trauma, or so I thought. My therapist, a gentle woman with knowing eyes, had guided me through the layers of shame and self-blame, helping me understand that what happened wasn't my fault. We'd worked through the nightmares, the panic attacks, the fear of intimacy that had plagued me for years after the assault. But now, a decade later, those old wounds were being ripped open again, and even my therapist's calming presence couldn't fully ease the pain. I reached out to Sven one last time, apologizing for the chaos while standing firm in my truth. His wife's response came 2 days later, a mix of gratitude and revelation. She confessed that there had been moments when Nico's behavior had made her uncomfortable, certain jokes that now took on a darker meaning, ways he would look at younger women at family gatherings, comments that seemed innocent at the time but now felt sinister. She vowed to keep her daughter far from him, though this stance would soon crumble under family pressure. I archived every cruel message that flooded my WhatsApp, keeping them as evidence while protecting my mental health. The police were surprisingly understanding when I brought them the documentation, the call logs from HR, the threatening messages, the social media harassment. They helped me obtain a restraining order to prevent Angie's mother from contacting my new workplace, though the process forced me to relive the trauma yet again through endless statements and paperwork. In a final, bitter twist, I learned through a mutual friend's annual gaming subscription call that everything had returned to normal in our hometown. Sven, who had once sworn to protect his daughter from Nico, now lived on the same street as his sister and her fiancé. The engagement party photos showed a perfect family reunion, my truth buried beneath their smiles. Nico's parents had gifted them a house in the most prestigious neighborhood, while Sven and his wife, who had once promised to stand firm, had bought a property nearby. Their daughter, the one they had vowed to protect, now played in the same garden where Nico hosted weekend barbecues. The compromise that Sven struck, allowing Nico in the family but restricting contact with his wife and daughter, had dissolved like morning mist. His wife's fierce protection of their daughter had softened into occasional uncomfortable glances, then resigned acceptance. I heard they even attended Angie and Nico's engagement dinner, where Nico gave a touching speech about growth, forgiveness, and family bonds. The photos showed them all raising their glasses in celebration, while somewhere in a filing cabinet, my police report gathered dust. The betrayal I feel isn't directed at Angie. She made her choice long ago, choosing love over loyalty, comfort over confrontation. Nor is it aimed at Sven, who ultimately chose family ties over moral stands, the path of least resistance over the rocky road of righteousness. It's a deeper sense of betrayal by life itself, by a world that preaches justice but practices convenience, that encourages truth but rewards silence. I fought to break my silence, endured the backlash, and weathered the storm, only to watch everything return to normal for everyone but me. The wound I thought had healed was ripped open again, leaving me to wonder if speaking up had accomplished anything at all. My mother's shame and insistence on keeping our family secret from relatives abroad, the professional upheaval, and the ultimate return to status quo for Nico and his supporters, it all serves as a stark reminder of why so many victims choose silence. The cost of speaking truth is measured not just in lost friendships and family ties, but in sleepless nights, therapy sessions, and career detours. Yet here I stand, exhausted but unbowed, ready to close this chapter of my life and focus on healing. Perhaps the only victory I can claim is finally speaking my truth, regardless of who chose to listen. As I prepare to start my new job next month, I find myself hoping that someone who heard my story will recognize the signs of predatory behavior before it's too late. That maybe, just maybe, my voice added to the chorus of survivors will help change the culture of silence, one truth at a time. It's not the justice I dreamed of, but it's the purpose I choose to find in my pain. The harassment from Angie's mother took increasingly creative forms. She didn't just stop at calling my workplace, she reached out to my extended family through social media, sent letters to my neighbors suggesting they be careful around me, and even contacted local community organizations where I had volunteered. Each new attack felt like a fresh betrayal from the woman who had once praised my old soul and cultural respect, who had taught me to make proper Russian tea and treated me like a daughter. My new company's HR team conducted extensive background checks before hiring me, and I had to explain the restraining order during the interview process. To their credit, they saw it as evidence of my professionalism in handling a difficult situation. Still, starting over meant carefully crafting my personal boundaries. I found myself hesitating before adding new colleagues on LinkedIn, scrutinizing every social media post, and carefully avoiding any mention of my past during team-building exercises. The cultural dynamics added another layer of complexity to the situation. In my mother's traditional community, a woman's reputation was her most valuable asset. The concept of speaking out about assault was foreign, almost taboo. These things happen, the older women would say, but we don't air our dirty laundry. My mother's reaction, focusing on my marriageability rather than my healing, stemmed from generations of ingrained beliefs about a woman's worth being tied to her purity. Sometimes I wonder if my story would have unfolded differently in another culture, another time. But then I remember that silence knows no borders, and shame speaks every language. What matters now is that I chose to speak, knowing the cost, accepting the consequences. And perhaps somewhere, another young woman will hear my story and recognize that her voice, too, deserves to be heard. Throughout this ordeal, my current partner has been my anchor in the storm. When I finally shared my story with him, his response was everything I needed but never expected. No judgment, no pity, just quiet strength and unwavering support. He held me through the nightmares that returned after Sven's call, attended therapy sessions when I asked, and reminded me daily that my worth isn't measured by my past trauma. His presence in my life stands as a testament to what real love should look like, built on respect, trust, and understanding. My best friend from college has been another source of strength. She's been there since I first started therapy at 21, watching me rebuild myself piece by piece. When the scandal erupted, she was the one who helped me archive the hateful messages, who stayed on the phone for hours as I processed my mother's reaction, who reminded me that speaking truth isn't a betrayal of culture but an act of courage. Our annual gaming subscription calls became a lifeline, a reminder that not all friendships are conditional, that some bonds grow stronger in the face of adversity. As I look toward the future, I find myself thinking about the young women in both my mother's community and Angie's family. I think about Sven's daughter, growing up in the shadow of unspoken truths. I think about the next generation of girls who might face their own moments of violation and silence. While I can't change what happened to me, or how others chose to respond, I can choose to be the person I needed when I was 17, someone who names truth for what it is, who stands firm in the face of denial, who chooses justice over comfort. The path ahead isn't clear, but it's mine to walk. Each step away from silence, each moment of speaking truth, builds a bridge toward a future where stories like mine might have different endings. It's not the justice I dreamed of, but it's the purpose I choose to find in my pain. And maybe, just maybe, that's a different kind of victory altogether. My career path hadn't been easy even before this crisis. I'd worked through law school while managing therapy sessions, often studying late into the night to maintain my scholarship. The company that sponsored my master's degree had seen potential in me. I'd risen from intern to team lead in record time, earning a reputation for handling complex cases with both precision and empathy. That's what made the current situation even more painful, watching years of carefully built professional relationships become colored by this personal revelation. The dynamics within my extended family shifted dramatically after my mother's reaction. Aunts who had once praised my academic achievements now whispered about that unfortunate incident. Cousins who used to seek my advice about career choices suddenly became distant. Yet surprisingly, my youngest aunt, always considered the family rebel, reached out privately to share her own story of survival, creating an unexpected alliance in a family divided by cultural expectations and generational trauma. The contrast between various support systems has been stark and illuminating. While traditional family structures crumbled under the weight of cultural shame, my chosen family, friends, colleagues, and support groups demonstrated the power of authentic connection. My therapist helped me understand that healing isn't just about processing trauma, it's about building new networks of support that validate our experiences and honor our truth. Looking back at the past 3 months, I see how this experience has fundamentally changed my understanding of justice, healing, and community. While the legal system offered limited protection through restraining orders, true safety came from building a network of allies who understood the importance of speaking truth to power. While my biological family struggled with cultural shame, my chosen family showed me what unconditional support looks like. Perhaps that's the most important lesson in all of this, that healing doesn't always look like what we expect, and justice doesn't always come in the form we hope for. Sometimes it's found in the quiet strength of a partner who believes you, in the fierce loyalty of friends who stand guard over your peace, in the courage to keep speaking your truth even when the world would prefer your silence. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.